5 years ago, if I had got up here and I'd started talking to you about blockchain technology, about Bitcoin, about cryptocurrencies, I think there would have been a lot of blank stares looking back at me. But in the last couple of years, we've seen blockchain technology go from virtually unheard of to literally front-page news. As you see here, banks seek to harness blockchain technology for settlement system. That's the front page of the Financial Times. And how the technology behind Bitcoin could change the world, that was on the front cover of The Economist. And rightly so, because the technology behind Bitcoin can and probably will change the world. It's the technology of secure record keeping. Now, that doesn't sound all that glamorous, right? But that's the technology that I think could upend our government institutions and our companies in the same way as the internet did in the 1990s. So it's worth just stopping and taking a look at those 1990s, because it gives us an idea, it gives us some context of how hard it can be to predict where blockchain technology might go in the next 10 years or so. In 1995, I started working at Deloitte in London. And I didn't get a laptop, and I didn't get a mobile phone, but I did get a pigeonhole. And 2 or 3 times a day, I used to walk down to my pigeonhole and I'd pick up my internal mail. Because that's right, in Deloitte in London in 1995, if you wanted to send a memo to all of the staff there, you'd have to have that typed. You'd have to have it printed or photocopied, and you'd have to have it hand-delivered to everybody's pigeonhole. It's kind of hard to imagine now. It's like, it doesn't even feel real anymore. I certainly can't imagine what it would be like trying to put on an event like this one with no access to email and no access to the internet. But the internet in the 1990s just wasn't that usable. It looked like this. We hadn't worked out what it was for yet. But over the coming years, the commercialization of the internet, and in particular, the mass adoption of email, would change everything. And now, of course, you could send a document from your computer to somebody anywhere in the world. And we do. In fact, we send 12 million emails worldwide every second. 12 million emails. But the interesting thing about that is what you're sending is a copy of a document. You get the copy, I get to keep the original. And that's fine when it's a document. And it's fine if it's a photo, it's fine if it's a spreadsheet or a presentation, but I think it's not fine if it's money. Because I'm pretty sure all of you, if I emailed you 1,000 rand, and you got a copy, and I got to keep the original, people are going to be pretty unhappy about that. And that's called the double spend problem. And that's the classic problem in online payments. And that's why, if you go online to make a payment these days, almost regardless of how you do it, whether you do it by online banking or credit card or a service like PayPal, you're basically just making an instruction to your bank to take money from your bank account and put it in somebody else's bank account. And there's at least one large institution sat in the middle of that transaction, making sure that it happens. It might be a bank. It could be a government agency. Increasingly, it might be one of the large tech companies, Apple, Google, Facebook. But it's like the internet made it into the 21st century, and somehow digital payments got stuck, got left behind. And the economist Milton Friedman recognized this in the late 1990s, and he said, one thing that's missing but will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash. And that's a method whereby on the internet, you can transfer money from A to B without A knowing B or B knowing A. He was talking about the digital equivalent of giving someone physical cash. If I give you a note, I don't need to know who you are. You don't need to know who I am. We don't need a bank to sit in the middle of that transaction. Milton Friedman died in 2006, and so he didn't get to see his prediction realized. But in 2008, this white paper was published, Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It was published by Satoshi Nakamoto, this mysterious person or group. We still don't know who this is. But the first sentence of this paper was basically Friedman's prediction come true. A purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. And so in 2009, Bitcoin was born, the world's first cryptocurrency. And it was born to really little fanfare. After a couple of years, there were just a few thousand people using the Bitcoin network in a really small group of followers. But Bitcoin was on an exponential trajectory, and there are now millions of people across the world using it, and hundreds of thousands of people making a transaction every day. So how does Bitcoin work? I mean, there's no central authority here. Basically, anybody can make a transaction on the Bitcoin network. You propose a transaction. That transaction is then secured using public-private key cryptography. And it's distributed out to this huge network of users, each one of which is basically maintaining a copy of the entire Bitcoin ledger. Every few minutes, all of the outstanding transactions get grouped up together, and they get added to the next block in the chain. The network adds it to the chain of previous blocks before it. And importantly, every block contains a little piece of the block before it, a signature from the block before it. And the reason that's important is that it provides this tamper-proof nature of blockchain technology. So if you want to go back 10 blocks and make a change to a transaction, you'd have to change not just that block, but every block after it. And that's really hard to do, and basically impossible to do without every other participant becoming aware of it. So now we have a system whereby anybody can propose a transaction, and there's no central authority required, and it's tamper-proof. We basically digitized secure record keeping. Now, you might rightly say, well, I think the banks had already done that. You know, they were using computers to do this. We think record keeping's been digital for a while. But what I'd like you to consider is this idea that record keeping comes in two different parts. So you have, it always has, by the way, right back to the start of commerce, you have this writing down bit of record keeping. So you do a transaction with somebody, you record that transaction. The other person records that transaction. But then the second bit of record keeping is reconciling that. Do the two of you actually agree on the transaction that you've just created? And that's the bit that we hadn't really digitized until blockchain technology came along. And so you all know what happens when you take a technology from analog and you make it digital. What happens is it has the potential to become exponential, and that's what we've seen happen with Bitcoin. These two graphs show that. So the first one is the market capitalization of Bitcoin. And look, this has had a huge amount of attention recently as the price of Bitcoin has gone up. And just last week, we saw the market capitalization, the value of all of the Bitcoins currently on issue, go over 70 billion US dollars. But I actually think the more interesting graph is the other one. And this is the network hash rate. And the network hash rate kind of measures the amount of power that's going into securing the Bitcoin network. So the Bitcoin miners compete with each other using this power to create the next block in the chain. And in doing so, they secure the network for everybody. And when they create the next block, they get rewarded in Bitcoin for doing that. So effectively, they're paid for providing this power. Now, last week, the amount of power being applied to the network was 7.5 exahash per second. And that number has been doubling every 4 to 6 months. I'll give you a bit of context about 7.5 exahash per second. If you were to take the world's largest supercomputer and add it to this network, it would make no difference whatsoever. If you were to add 2 million versions of the world's largest supercomputer and add them to this network, it might get to maybe 1% of the network. There's an unthinkably large amount of computing power being applied to this network. So we have a currency that's rapidly gaining in value, that's rapidly gaining in the amount of power being applied to it, that anybody can use and that doesn't require a central authority. Of course, people are starting to sit up and pay a bit of attention to it. And you see that here in South Africa. So recently, the Reserve Bank said that they will be looking at regulations for cryptocurrencies. And along with many other reserve banks around the world, they've said that they're considering their own digital currency for South Africa, one built on a blockchain here, its own blockchain. But blockchain technology is not just about cryptocurrencies. And so one of the things I want to do today is take you through 3 other areas that blockchain technology might be used. So the first is registration and transfer of assets. So yes, of course, you can use blockchain technology to register and transfer cryptocurrencies. But it can also be used for any asset that can be uniquely identified. And the amount of value that a blockchain system would add really depends on how those assets are currently being registered and transferred. So as an example, in the financial services world, we talk about shares. There are already a large infrastructure in place that secures how we register and transfer shares. We have exchanges, we have custodians, we have central counterparties, we have registrars. And so really, the opportunity here is not to create something entirely new, but instead to look at how can we make that system more efficient and more accessible. And what you see happening in the financial services world is actually the existing players in this market starting to invest heavily in blockchain technology. And that includes here in South Africa, where Straight, the central securities depository, has a subsidiary called Fractal. And Fractal is responsible for looking at new technologies. Fractal has been looking at a wide range of technologies, but in the blockchain space, it's looked at share trading, it's looked at settlement, and it's looked at shareholder voting. So a number of different things going on in this space. What about land? Land's another asset that can be registered on a blockchain. So The Economist recently reported that in 31 African countries, less than 5% of rural land has any formal title at all. So it turns out that blockchain technology is really uniquely suited to dealing with this issue. And there's, in fact, a company working on this in Ghana. They're called Ben, and they're a startup. And they came out of the Techstars Accelerator program. And what they're doing now is they're working with the Ghanaian government to put all land titles in Ghana onto a blockchain system. And they're working with Barclays Bank, who are looking to then say, if you have a land title on this system, you can have access then to mortgages on that land. And the next stage of that technology is being able to pay for your electricity, pay for your water, actually receive rent for your property if it's rented out, all in the same system. So that's financial services and land. But what about other assets, ones that have never really been registered in this sort of way? There are huge opportunities available in looking at our supply chain. So for assets like diamonds, like food, like medicine, there's a company called Everledger who are tracking diamonds from where they're mined to where they're sold on a blockchain system. And that means that when you go in to buy a diamond, you can look at the entire history of where that has been and be certain that you're not buying a diamond that's been stolen. Be certain that you're not buying a conflict diamond. And in the food area, if you were to buy a fish, for example, you were to look at the history of your fish and know that it's been sustainably caught. We actually just saw a couple of days ago IBM announcing a partnership with Walmart. Walmart will be putting all of the food that is coming into their stores, along with their supply partners, onto the IBM blockchain. And the point behind that is if there's ever a contamination scare, they can immediately know what food is affected and get that withdrawn off the shelves much more quickly, providing a much safer experience for the customers for Walmart. And what about medicine? So one of the areas that we're looking at blockchain technology for is being able to track vaccines from where they are created to where they're administered, and be sure they've been kept at the right temperature, saving thousands of lives from vaccines that are applied that have spoiled en route. So a number of different areas there for registration and transfer of assets. The next area I want to talk about is digital identity. So a lot of us, most of us, are putting more and more of our lives online. But when it comes to proving who we are online, proving our address, proving our date of birth, proving our qualifications, we're still having to rely on those same paper documents that we were relying on 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And that, if you go into a bank and you want to open a new bank account, anti-money laundering regulations mean you have to prove who you are. You have to prove your identity. You probably have to prove your address. And that has to be done with these paper-based systems. And that's slow, and it's cumbersome. And it also, by the way, excludes huge parts of the population from being able to do that and access our bank systems. So how can blockchain help here? Well, imagine if you were to take your identity and split it up into tiny little bits. Your first name, your last name, each bit of your address, your qualifications, your date of birth. In future, that might be your DNA, your fingerprints. It could be your blood type. It could be a retina scan. And all of these can be held securely on the blockchain system. They can be held confidentially on the blockchain system. They can be verified by probably the same parties that are verifying them today, but only having to do it once. So a government agency might verify your name and your date of birth. Your university or your school might verify your qualifications. And then when you want somebody to verify that identity, you can show them just the bit that they need to see. So, if I go and hire a car, they might need to know maybe my age. But they don't need all the other information that might sit on the physical identity document that I would give them. In a blockchain-based system, I'd be able to tell them just the bits they need to know. So making this more efficient, making it more accessible, and more private. So there's a company working in this space called Civic. In fact, there are lots of companies working in this space, to be honest. It's one of the big challenges for blockchain. Civic have a mobile phone app, and you can do exactly this. You put your details on there, you get it verified, and then you can pass those on to people who you want to know information about your identity. In Australia, Australia Post have been working on a system very similar to this, and they've done some research and shown that this could have an $11 billion impact on the Australian economy. And that's ironing out all of these inefficiencies, but it's also getting more and more people to engage online. So there's lots of opportunity for getting this right, as well as, of course, opportunity for the 2 billion people or more worldwide who currently have no formal identity papers whatsoever. The last area I just want to talk about is cross-border transfers. So this is a big area for blockchain technology. $600 billion a year are made in remittance payments. And that mostly goes to developing countries. It's mostly made by migrants sending money home, and it's mostly made in very small amounts. And the cost of doing this can be very high. Now, here in South Africa, you have Hello Payza, who are competing in this space and keeping the cost of remittance payments down. But elsewhere in the world where that service isn't available, the cost can be as much as 10% of the payment being made. And that's a lot of money that is not getting to where we need it to be. And so you have companies like Abra, who basically use the Bitcoin network to fix this issue. So Abra allow you to have digital cash on your mobile phone in one country and transfer that to somebody else's mobile phone in another country. Now, as I said, they use the Bitcoin network, but that's entirely invisible to the users. The users just see local currency. And one of the good things about Abra is how easy it is to get money on and off their network. In fact, if you use a bank transfer, it's actually entirely free. But often in developing countries, people don't have access to a bank. And it's one of the reasons why services like Western Union have been so important, because people can go into a Western Union branch and pick up local cash. And Abra have solved this problem by using a big network of tellers. So you get the cash on your mobile phone, and you look for a teller, and it's like an Uber-style service. There are hundreds of thousands of tellers. You just find the nearest one. You walk up to them. You give them the digital cash off your phone. They give you local currency. If you scale that up from remittance payments to international finance, of course, the percentage cost of each payment goes down, but the problems don't entirely go away. These are still expensive payments to make. They still take a long time. A good percentage of them still fail entirely. And so a company called Ripple is working inside the banking system to try and improve this. So Ripple has its own blockchain. It's got its own cryptocurrency. It's called XRP. And what Ripple does is it allows its now 75 banking clients to connect with each other using that cryptocurrency worldwide. And that means that a payment can be made from one bank to another instantly. And that saves around 60% of processing and reconciliation costs. Again, a huge amount of money being returned back to our economy just from one relatively small change. So that's 3 areas. And look, the opportunities for blockchain technology in lots of areas are enormous. I wanted to leave you with this from tech entrepreneur Mark Andreessen. He said that Bitcoin offers a sweeping vista of opportunity to reimagine how the financial system can and should work in the internet era. I actually think the opportunity for blockchain technology is even wider than that. It's not just our financial system, it's all of our systems. And so my question for you today is think about your own lives, your own work, your own communities. My challenge to you is how are you going to use this new technology. Thank you.